microphones on, you are consenting to be recorded. You can also turn your cameras off if you wish. I believe I can post just my screen and not anyone else's, but your audio will be included if you chime in for questions when we have a question time. The way I would like to do this class is I'm going to present the slides, and after each slide, I'll pause for questions. I will have, if you could put any questions as they come up in the chat, Sarah will be keeping an eye on the chat, and she'll be letting me know if there are questions that need answering.
Looks like Tracy has a very quick question.
Yes.
Tracy, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
I just did. So where is the chat? I don't see it.
On the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there will be two buttons. One of them says people and one of them says chat. Try to click the chat button.
No, I don't see it. It's okay. I'll just be quiet.
Okay.
All right.
All right. I will also be paying attention. So if you have a question, you can also just like wave your hands very, very frantically, and I will be watching.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So I'm presenting. Okay. So this class is Inkle Weaving, Patterns and Loom Setup Overview by Lady Katla Viborg. That's me. Lady Patience Faircloth is moderating. So the purpose of this class is to focus on modern Inkle loom anatomy, pattern creation, loom setup, and how to weave an Inkle band. So we're going to go from start to finish of getting a pattern, setting up your Inkle loom, and weaving, all in 2 hours. The first part is Inkle loom anatomy. So when I'm talking about the Inkle loom, I'm going to be using these terms. I call the body of the Inkle loom, that's that main piece of wood that everything is attached to. The base is the part that lets you rest your Inkle loom on a flat surface so you don't have to hold it upright. It makes it so that you can put it on a table and you can weave on top of a table so you're not hunched forward or straining. The tension bar is that bar that it's on either side of the body of the loom, and you can slide it back and forth to make to increase or decrease tension on your loom. There's the heddle dowel. That is the dowel that you will be putting your heddle on. Your heddle is just a round piece of string that we'll go over how to make in a minute. The warping dowels are the dowels that your warp rests on. Your warp will also be on your tension bar so that you can change the tension, because as you weave, there's pickup and your warp will get slightly shorter. It's similar to when you braid something and you lose a little bit of length because everything gets scrunched in a bit. All right. Are there any questions at this point? All right, no questions. So, Inkle patterns. There is a website, carolingiarealm.blog/pattern generator. The image on the screen is, I filled in colors to make a pattern on there. I really love this site because until you get an idea of how the threads get placed to make different patterns in Inkle weaving, you can lay out it has a grid and you have a paint dropper thing and it fills in colors and you can see what your pattern, you'll see what the pattern would look like, and it also gives you a warp layout as well. And that warp layout is where it says pattern. I refer to the pattern as a warp layout because that is how you're going to be warping your loom. There are little black dots over every other square. For Inkle weaving, you take a heddle and you put it over every other string. So you have your heddle, and it'll be on your heddle peg, which is my thumb. And then if my pointer finger is a string, you put it on top, and you put that back on the heddle dowel, so that then this string is held and can be moved by the heddle. You can also hand draw your own patterns. I have an example of how I hand draw mine. I put all of my heddled strings on top, and I put the strings that will not have a heddle underneath, and I do it in a zigzag pattern. And that also helps me visualize what my end product is going to look like. I did numbers so you can see what order they would be warped in. So I do string 1, then 2, 3, 4. And I did match the pattern that I have displayed here.
We have a very brief question from Etane. If you can put your fingers higher next to your face.
Okay, so this is the heddle. And then, so if this is the heddle dowel, my thumb, and my pointer finger is the string, I then put it over. So now this holds the string in place, but I can also move those strings. So that's heddles. Any other questions?
It looks like there's a question about number 1, under or over. We're going to get to that pattern in just a minute, but as you can see in the pattern, number 1 is heddled, so it's going to go over.
Yes. All right. Anything else before I move on?
We've got... Okay.
Okay.
Yes, there is a trick to getting the heddles the same size. We're going to talk about that now.
We're going to talk about heddle creation. So on the image of the screen, if you'll remember back to the anatomy portion, I called one of the dowels the heddle dowel, and the rest of them are warp dowels. Well, the heddle dowel, that is where you will be putting your heddles when you eventually warp on your pattern. We'll get to that later. To make the heddles, you make a circle between the heddle dowel and your upper warping peg that's closest to the heddle dowel. You're gonna make a circle, and then I like to try to tie a square knot because those hold the best. If you can't tie a square knot, then just do 3 knots, and I usually have good luck with that. You want the knots to be sturdy because you don't want your heddle to become unraveled in the middle of weaving. You can test them by, you can see the knot here. I think this I probably tied 3 times because I'm bad at doing square knots on my first try. But you can pull. If you pull it hard, that should be as much tension as it will get while it's on your loom. And if you do this pulling motion on it, that will make sure that it won't come undone while you're weaving or while you're warping. Getting them the same size, you put them around those 2 dowels. If you can't get them super tight consistently, just try to have them be sort of the same. You want them to be the same size. If they're all a little bit loose, that's fine. If they're all really tight, that's also fine. It gets harder if some of them are loose and some of them are tight. So whatever way is easiest for you to make those heddles, you should do. I tied mine really tight because that's the only way I can keep them consistent. But also if they're a little bit off, it's not the end of the world either. The color of the heddles doesn't matter. I have, when you have remnants from a weaving, you'll usually have a foot or 2 at the end that you can't weave because of how it is on the loom. Those extra ends I make into heddles for my smaller loom. My larger loom, I have had to make heddles on purpose because remnants were not long enough. You'll always have to make heddles to start because you don't have any weaving remnants yet. So yeah, are there any questions about making heddles? Okay. I'm going to move on to the next slide. setting up the loom. So this is the pattern we're going to be using for the class. There are two ways to warp a loom. There is continuous warping and there is non-continuous warping. In non-continuous warping, you go through, this will be, I believe it's the next image. You would do each warp string, you would do separately and tie off separately. I do continuous warping where I don't actually tie anything together until the very end. So it's like a little infinity scarf on the loom. I prefer that because I find the tensioning is better. Because when I tie everything together at the very end, then I can use my tension peg to even everything out. So all of the strings have the same tension. Whereas if you're tying them individually, you can have one tighter than another. And that can cause some problems down the road. Again, with this pattern, every other string is going to have a heddle. The first string is going to have a heddle and the last string is going to have a heddle. I always weave with heddles at the beginning and the end of the pattern. So I always have an odd number of strings. So this is 19 strings total, or it's 19 goes around the loom, and it requires 10 heddles. Are there any questions about this pattern before I move on to the next slide, which is images of how to warp the loom? All right. So, warping your loom. What you want to do, and I will move my camera in a moment, but I make a loop on my starting thread because I put it over the first peg, which actually I should probably transition my camera. But there's two basic patterns that you can see in these images. The first image I have is just a warp string with a heddle on it. For that, you go over that first warping peg and you follow along, and I'll show you that in a second. For strings that do not have a heddle, they go underneath that top warping peg. And that is because you want all the strings at near where the heddle lies, you want them to be about the same height, because that is where, but there will be a slight gap, and that is where you're going to be weaving. All right, so if you can hold on for a second, I'm going to move my camera so I can show you all warping a loom live.
If you'd like to see that pattern that is posted for the warping layout, in addition, or seeing it still instead of seeing it done live, you can also pin that image and it will show you it long enough for you to study it, and then you can come back to see the live by unpinning it.
Okay, so for warp,
Ella, is it possible for you to put it back on the pattern after, or on the warping path?
I did already.
So this is the pattern. I meant the other.
Oh, this one? Wait. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So for warping it, I make it's more visible here. I make a loop, and this loop is going to go on this warping peg here. This is not it's not the beginning of the warp. When I talk about the dowels, will be what I refer to as dowel number 1. But to start it, you need this down here because when you're finished, you will cut this off and you will tie a knot around the middle here. So you need this extra length to be able to tie a knot. All right, so for the first string is blue, and we need a heddle. So we're going to take the heddle, and we're going to put it on the warping dowel, or not the warping dowel, put it on the heddle dowel, and then we take our string, and we put that on top of the heddle, and then we take the heddle, so we have a little loop on the heddle dowel, and it is holding the string in place. Then we go over the first warping dowel, and we go over the second warping dowel on the top, and then we're going to go down to the farthest left dowel, and we're going to wrap around that, and we're going to come back up and wrap around the second dowel down on the right hand side, and we're going to go down and wrap around the second dowel in from the left on the bottom, and then we go back up and we wrap around the third dowel down on the right hand side, and we go down and wrap around the third dowel in from the left on the bottom, and then we wrap around this last dowel, and we're going to come down and over to all the way on the far left, the bottom dowel there. We're going to wrap around that. You can see my tension peg is at halfway right now. You can move it further back to get it longer, but you should not be all the way over because you want to be able to tighten the loom if you need to. If the strings, I recommend putting it in the middle for your first warp, because if your strings are loose, you can then take up that tension by taking the dowel and moving it to the right. So for warping, you've gone around this peg. You're now going to go up to the tension loom and around, or to the tension rod and around it. Now you're going to come up to this warping peg where that loop is. And this is one circuit, what I will refer to as one circuit of your warp. You have gone all the way around all of the pegs. If you were only doing a single string, you would tie them together about here in the middle. This, I saw a question go across.
Yes, we have a question. What if your loom doesn't have that last peg on the bottom?
I would take a picture of your loom empty and send it to somebody who knows how to warp Inkle looms, and they can draw sort of the diagram of where you'll need to warp around it. Inkle looms can be warped different ways. Even the way I'm warping this one, there are other ways to warp it. So this is very specifically how to warp this layout of Inkle loom. If you send me a picture of that, I will provide my email address at the end of class. If you want to send me a picture of your loom, I can take a look at it and let you know where the layout of the thread should go.
May I interject briefly?
Mm-hmm.
I have a loom that is built differently from yours, and it also does not have those that final peg. What you can do is work from your tension bar by itself. Let me get mine and I'll show you. Just one moment.
Oh, so yeah, what you can do is how this goes around like so. Instead of coming around, you would just go around the tension bar and up to the top peg.
So this is my loom. Mine's much bigger. My loom, like Katla said, it just has a tension bar right here, and this is what moves back and forth. There is no bar here. There's nothing right here. So I start my loom. This is where the loop, the original loop goes, and it goes up through that top peg like Katla displayed earlier. So it's possible to warp your loom, whichever kind of loom that you have. And as Katla said, send her a picture and she will help you with it. But you can work from your tension bar.
Okay. Are we ready for the warp pattern for the string that does not have a heddle? Okay, so that's the pattern for when it has a heddle. Now your next string, because you did one heddle, the next string is not going to have a heddle. So what you do is you come underneath this warping peg number 1, and then you follow around, you go above this top left or top right warping peg, and then you're going to come down and you're going to follow the pattern that you did before, where you're going to do diagonals across. And then you're going to come all the way over to down around your tension peg and above that top leftmost warping peg. So now you can see there's a little bit of space between these. That's fine. It's actually, that is what you want. You want a little bit of space. And you can see the heddle is holding everything in place. When you are weaving, you will be pushing these threads up and down because these threads move, and the heddles will stay rigid for this loom setup. Some looms you do use the heddle threads to push up and down. It depends on whichever string is on top. When you see this portion here near the heddles, the string on top is usually the one that you will be pushing up or down. So now this is the pass number 2 for the warp. I'm just going to push everything down a little bit to keep it neat and keep the tension consistent. And then I'm going to take my second heddle and I'm going to put it over everything. I put my string on top of the heddle, put the heddle on the heddle peg, and now I'm going to go above that first warping peg, over the top of the other top warping peg, and I'm going to head back down. And I'm going to follow the pattern of strings that I have done before. You'll know you have missed a peg or messed up the pattern if, say, you're on the top and you're going fast. You come down and you do this peg. Well, you can see there's strings crossing each other. None of these strings should cross each other at all. There should always be space between them. So when I see that, I go, oh no, I did the wrong one. Okay, now there's a straight line. There's nothing in here.
It looks like we have a question from Arliana. Is there something, I'm not sure I understand from the chat. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
It's difficult to see the colors of the threads. The continuous one that you're warping with,
It's the same thread?
is it the same thread or a different one?
Yes. So the first 6 passes of this warp are going to be blue. And that is from the pattern. Those first 6 squares are all blue. So it's going to be 6 blue. then 4 yellow. Wait, it's not 6. It's not 4 yellow. It's 6 blue, and then there's the yellow squares. I don't have the pattern in front of me. I have my heddles laid out, so I know how many it's going to be. But it's going to be all blue, then yellow, then blue.
Thank you.
So yeah, so this is now the 4th string. Again, because it has no heddle, I'm going underneath this top peg and then around, matching the patterns of the rest of the loom. I do push down the threads so they stay together, so it's easier to see if something has gone awry. The only place threads should be crossing is right near the heddles right here. That is the only place. So around my tension peg, and now I am on my 3rd heddle of the blue, and with the pattern, there's going to be 3 blue heddled threads and 3 non-heddled blue threads. So I know that this is thread number 5. And I'm going to do 1 pass with the heddled. And then now the heddled pass is complete. So there's 1 more of blue with no heddle. So again, I go underneath this top warping peg. And then follow the pattern. And you can, if you hold it with sort of your pointer finger down to help unspool the thread, I'm also holding the crochet cotton and unwinding it slowly as I go. You'd also put them in a yarn bowl to hold stuff. That's how you can speed warp. And so, okay, so that is 6 blue threads. Now I need to switch to yellow because the next thread color is yellow. My next heddle that I have laid out is this teal, so I know that it's a color switch. So to temporarily hold this, I'm just going to wrap this string around a peg a bunch of times, and that will hold for a couple minutes. And I need to grab, because you want to keep the tension on your warp so that you have less tension issues to deal with when you have finished warping everything. So now I'm going to grab my yellow string, and because this is a continuous warp, we're going to tie a knot to connect the 2 strings so it still stays in that loop. This is going to be similar to how you are doing the knots for the heddles. So the heddles are actually really good practice for this part of it because this is going to be under tension while you're tying it. So what I do is I give myself a lot of space. So I'm going to be cutting. You want any of your knots to be beneath your heddles, because when you pull the warp back to get the knots out of the way, you don't want to have to be lifting your heddles up to get knots over them. So all knots should be in this sort of area. I leave myself a lot of space, so I cut it near the top. And now I have this length of thread that, because remember, your full circuit of warp is from like the middle of these 2 warping pegs. So it starts here and it goes all around and then it ends here. It does not start here, does not start here. It's sort of in the middle of the 2 pegs. So I have my other color, and what I do is I hold it with my pinky and my ring finger. You can also kind of like wrap it around your finger. Actually, you can wrap it a couple times, wrap the string a couple times around this peg, and that will hold the tension. So you can do a square knot. Again, you want to pull on this to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. Oh, because see, that's slipping. And that came off. So I'm going to tie another knot just to make sure that this is going nowhere. So now when I pull on this, it's not going anywhere. So now I have combined the yellow and the blue strings. And because the last string did not have a heddle, it is now time for another heddle. So you take the heddle, put the yellow on top of it, pull it over, go above that warping peg, and then over the top and follow around. I'm going to push everything down to keep it even. And now you can kind of see where the yellow meets the yellow again. That's a complete warp circuit. So that was string number 7. We have a heddle already on, so the next one is going to be yellow with no heddle. And that goes, oop. Let's see, you can lose tension and it's fine. You just pull it tight if you drop a thread. So because this is no heddle, we're going underneath this warping peg, but we're going above the further right one. And then follow your pattern. And then around the tension peg, around the warping peg. And now we're on to another heddle. And because it's a heddle, you go above the first peg and above the second peg, and then follow your pattern, or follow the warp. And that was a heddle. So next one is going to be no heddle. So you're going to go underneath peg number 1, but still above peg number 2. And then follow your pattern. Follow the warp. Okay, and then do one time. All right, so then another heddle. So it seems like this warp is probably going to be more like 30 minutes to an hour. So this one was a heddle, so I went above and above. So I have not finished a warp yet. At this point, if people want, I can warp the rest of this particular pattern. And if there's any questions, people can ask that while I'm warping. Or I set up a stunt loom that is finished that I warped this morning. It is a different loom than this one. It has a bigger loom, but this is with everything on. Would people prefer that I finish warping this loom and do the last of it fast, or move on to the stunt loom? Because we have...
It looks like we have a vote to finish this loom.
All right. Is anyone adverse to me warping at full speed? Warp 10, if we will.
Warp 10. Give people yes. So it looks like we've got another vote for this loom for full speed.
Right.
And then to slow down when you finish it off.
All right.
I'm also going to be continuing to moderate the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to type it in the chat, or you can come off of mute carefully. I don't want 25 people to start talking at once, and ask your question that way. Meg, for your question, the number of heddles, there is a post. I will post the link again for a WordPress page that you can access that has the handout for today, and that has the pattern inside there. That'll tell you how many heddles, how many strings per color.
This pattern is 10 heddles. It is 19 strings total. It starts with a heddle and ends with a heddle, which is why it is 19 instead of 20, because you're doing every other string as a heddle. All right, with full warp speed, my crochet cotton may go flying out of my lap. So we'll see if I can keep it all together. That's why the yarn bowls are sometimes a great idea, because you can put it in, and when you're pulling lots of string off really fast, it can't just like fly out of your lap. All right. So at full speed, I am doing, this string does not have a heddle, so I'm going underneath, and you just go over. I also push everything down so the strings do not get tangled back here. And when I'm warping just for myself and not for an audience, I push the strings almost all the way down to the bottom of these pegs. I left them higher up so they were a bit more visible. So now we have a heddle, and this is going to be the last yellow string. So again, we go over and then around, 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 around.
Does anyone want for the color changeover to go slowly again, and then we'll pick the speed back up?
My thought was to go slow for the color changeover.
Perfect. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, so this is the last yellow. I know for this pattern specifically, the heddles began and ended the yellow, which is why I did them in the teal, so I would know which ones they were. So again, my knot for this one is right here. I usually need 2 to 3 inches to tie my square knot, so I'm going to cut the string up here because I want my knot to end up somewhere around here. You want the knots to be close to each other. You do not want a knot up here and a knot all the way down here. That's a waste of your warp. Within 3-4 inches of each other is usually the best. I aim for the middle because, again, the longer your string is, if you mess up your first knot and you have to cut it out, you will then have space to do, like if you mess up this knot and you have to cut it, your next knot will be down here. But if you start here and you mess it up, your next knot is like on your warping peg, and that's no good. So again, I hold it. I put the string in my hand so that my pinky and ring finger are clamped on the string so that I'm keeping tension on the warp. And I make my knot and I pull on it. And because it's the warp, I think this square knot did take, but it's a warp, so I'm going to give it another knot in there. Just because it's very demoralizing when your warp explodes on you mid-weaving. All right, so yellow is all done. I'm putting it out of the way. And now the last one was a heddle, and you can, if you're ever not sure, you can go where they're crossing over and pick up the last string on top, and you're like, is it a heddle? Is it not? So this last one was a heddle. So this is no heddle, which means I'm going underneath. And now we're back to full speed.
I have a question. Coming from Attain, the question is how much cotton do you use? And I guess the first part of that question is, how big is the loom that you are working on? Is it a 2-yard loom? Is it a 3-yard loom? What do you say? What would you say is the maximum amount of yardage you can get from this loom?
This is a 2-yard loom. I can get about 6 feet from it. On this layout of the warp is the maximum yardage I can get. You do not need to warp in this pattern. There are less efficient patterns to warp a loom. If you just need a little bit of thread, you can use some or none of these warping towels. So
if you have a 2-yard loom, that is 2 yards approximately in one pass. It might be a little more, it might be a little less, depending on your tension and where the bar is, how thick your thread is. So if you multiply 2 yards by however many passes it goes around, that is as much thread as you may need approximately.
Yeah, so this is size 10 crochet cotton. That specifically will get you about 2 yards. If you use tencel of a similar size, it gets you a similar amount of yardage. Oh, and this is the last heddle. So how much crochet cotton you need? I did some calculations, and I honestly I never really calculate out how much thread I need. But if you have 2 full cones of crochet cotton, a cone being this bundle, if you have 2 full bundles of this crochet cotton, that is enough to warp your loom 3 or 4 times if you're only doing 10 heddles. I think it comes out to something like 45 for this. The total warp was something close to 60 yards or a little bit over. And it was about 45 yards of the blue and 19 yards of the yellow, I believe. And then you also need some string for heddles, but that can be whatever crochet cotton you have. It doesn't have to be the same color. The thread for your weft, I recommend using the same color as whatever your outside threads are so that you do not see little dots of color. I'll show some examples at the end of class. If the weft, which is the thread that goes back and forth, if that matches the outside crochet cotton, then you will not see it. If it is a different color, you will see the weft. You will not see the weft in the pattern itself on the top of it, because this you pull tight enough to pull everything close together, so that you only see the warp. You do not see the weft when it is woven. So for the, I don't know how to calculate how much string you need for the weft. My guess is it's close to, if not, it's a similar amount to the warp, if not more. So you're probably going to need like 60, 70 yards for the weft. Again, these cones come in, I think they're 350 yards. So if you have a full cone, you're fine. You only need to worry when your cone starts to look like this, because, gosh, I don't know how much is on there, but I also usually have duplicates of each color. So when I see my cone getting this low, I'll buy another one of the same color. So if I run out, you can tie a knot like you did for colors that don't match. You can do the same thing with matching colors if you run out of thread. But for beginners, start with a full cone of your own crochet cotton so that you will not run out of thread. Okay, so I've done the last heddle. It is now time to take this loom, and we are going to need to connect the first thread we put on, or yeah, so that warp number 1, we're gonna connect to, this is warp number 19. So we need to tie these two together. So first step, I'm going to cut this thread. If you can have someone help you, this is a great time to have a second set of hands. It's like tying ribbons for presents for people. Because you want the tension to stay so that everything lays nicely. However, if you lose a little bit of tension, that is also okay. Now I'm going to, so I cut this thread. This next thread I'm going to cut near.
Hey, Katla, can you pause just one moment, please?
Yes.
If you are having trouble seeing Katla's hands as she is tying this part off, if you are still seeing the warp pattern still images, if you mouse over that screen with the warped pattern, there should be a couple of different images that pop up. Click the pin to screen or unpin button. That should unpin it, and Katla should be the person who is now pinned. Alternatively, you can do the same maneuver and hover over Katla's screen and click that pin button.
Okay. So I have my warp thread, which is warp thread 19. I have cut that off from the cone. So now it is loose and in my hands. The next step is you want to keep tension on that. So if you have someone else, they can hold this tight for you. I weave alone, but
Can I pause you one more time? Fiore, can you take yourself off mute and repeat your question? I'm not sure I understand, please. You are still on mute.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to, I don't use Google Meet very often, so I couldn't find it. So we get through the last pass. That's the one that's thread 19.
Yes.
And then we're going to tie that to that thread 1 that had the loop on it. Am I still with you?
Yes.
Okay. And you haven't done that yet?
I have not done that yet. So,
okay, excellent. Now, okay, I am with you.
Okay. So I've cut thread 19. I still need to cut thread number 1. I am, again, taking the string and putting it in my left hand I'm tightening my pinky and ring finger around that string to help hold it tight. I'm now going to take my scissors and I'm cutting thread number 1 free from the loom. So now I have 2 threads free, and I'm going to take them and gonna make a little X with them. So I'm gonna cross them over, and then however you tie ribbon, you wanna try to keep it as tight as you can. This is where if you do not do a square knot, you can make it slip a little bit when you pull tight. So this actually ended up being tensioned pretty well. If this is loose, do not worry, because that's where your tension bar comes in. So with this has been knotted. I'm going to tie this again, and I'm going to tie it. So I tied it once, I tied it twice, and I'm tying it a 3rd time because I really want this to stay in place. And I'm going to trim the extra thread because it just gets in the way. So you now have a fully warped loom.
Yay!
Yay! I'm gonna turn off my overhead light because I think that is. Nope. I think the light from the windows is kind of washing out the thread. All right. Okay, so now this is warped, and the way you can see that there's like this space between the two. When you weave, you're going to be pushing up, and you're going to be pushing down. And that is where the shuttle is going to go through. So now we're on to weaving. Step 1 of weaving is you will need a shuttle with thread on it.
If you would like to see the PowerPoint again, you're going to need to switch between, we have a lot of people on the call. You're going to need to switch between the 2 screens. There's not a way to really pin both of them. But if you'd like to see the warping PowerPoint section, you'll need to pin over to that one. And then in order to see Katla preparing it for the actual weaving, you'll need to put back over to her screen.
Okay. So at this point, the PowerPoint's mostly just bullet points for me to hit. So don't feel like you need to have your eyes on that. So right here, this is my current collection of shovels that I have. You can see they're all sorts of sizes. These 2 really glossed out ones, those are bone. So I prefer, I'm trying to think what his SEA name is. Dave made these 2 shuttles. These are all shuttles I have bought. I like these, but that's just my preference. I prefer the square ones. So you all have, anyone who got shuttles from Peter has ones that are shaped like this. To put thread on them, I have found it easiest to tie. I'm going to pick a darker thread so it's visible against that. I have found it easiest to tie on the beginning thread to the shuttle, because then when you're wrapping it around, it can't come loose. Like it's on here now. Yeah, it's kind of glowing. So to put thread on, you just You go over and there's a hole, and you go around the hole and you just wrap the thread around it. If any of you have ever wrapped thread onto any sorts of bobbins or that sort of thing, you just go in a circle so that each side has thread. When you put the thread on, you want to be aware of how far it's standing out from the shuttle itself. You do not want it to be like your thumb's thickness sticking out from the shuttle, because then when you're going to weave, you need space for all of that. It's much easier to have the shuttle, have it stick out maybe a 1/4 inch. Much like this one, I could put on a bit more, but to have it stick out 1/8 or a 1/4 inch away from the shuttle, that will not impede your weaving. And I will also show you how to, when you run out of one weft thread, to add in another one. So you can, most of my bands have multiple weft threads. It's not one continuous weft thread down the whole of the trim. So you don't need to worry about making sure you have exactly as much thread as you need to weave the whole piece. Are there any questions about shuttles before I move on? Okay. Just gonna move those out of the way. So now, well, and the crochet cotton's on the floor. So now you're going to, ooh, that's really bright. I'm sorry, guys. Now you're going to take your loom, and these knots, you need them to, instead of being up, the knots right now are up here, and you actually want them to be down behind this first peg, because your weaving area is from this warp peg to this warp peg. And it's really from where the heddles are to there, because that's when it opens. That's what you're gonna put your shuttle through. So what you're going to need to do is take your tension bar and you're gonna bring it towards yourself. You're gonna have these, the base of the loom is gonna be away from you. So you're gonna bring the tension bar towards yourself and then tighten it again. And now you can see this is much looser. I can move the thread up and down. Whereas before, when I tighten this tension bar, I move it away from myself. Now when I move this, there's much less movement. So you loosen the tension, and then you're going to grasp. I have found that if you hold, I think it's this length, so that first diagonal pass down, if you hold there and you hold at the base of your weaving area and you tug, so the weaving area you will pull towards yourself, and the long diagonal one you'll move away from your body, and you'll slide that string until all of the knots, I don't know if you can see, all of the knots, you can see the loose threads, they're down here now. So now your weaving area is all thread, and also the part that did the crossover from thread 1 to thread 19, from warp 1 to warp 19, that is now also underneath here. So it's all straight threads in your weaving area. So now you're going to move the tension bar away from yourself so that this is tight. For tension, your tension does not need to be like the head of a drum tight. Some people, it's their preferred weaving method, especially with the looms Peter has made. These dowels are screwed in, so they are not going anywhere until I crack them out. With glued pegs, I do not know how well they will hold. Also, if you're thinking of transitioning into card weaving, you need to have a much looser tension than you do for Inkle. Keeping the Inkle tension tight does help keep your weaving even. So, I mean, play with it until you find a tension you like. And then, so mine's at about where I like it. I like to be able to shift up and down a little bit. So now I have my shuttle and I have a tail of string that you want about like maybe a foot. You do not want it longer than your arm from sort of like hand to shoulder. Similar to embroidery, that's as far as you're going to pull out. So you want a shorter string is better for weaving, I have found. So with the heddle, how that affects the weaving. So you can see there's this open space right here. I use the shuttle with my right hand generally, and I move the warp around with my left. But I'll do it differently so you all can see. I'm going to lift up this top thread so that you can see the heddles underneath. I wonder if I can weave on its side. So yeah, so you'll have, all right, so you lift this up and then you put the shuttle through. Make sure that this tail does not go all the way through. And then when you go back to the right, you're going to take these threads that are here, that are underneath that top warp peg, and you're going to push them down so you can see all of your heddle colors on top. And then between those threads, you're going to put your shuttle. You're going to do a tap down near where your thread went through before. And then you're going to pull this thread back through. And you want to look. The first couple passes are going to be messy, but you want to look and see that the edge of your thread, you don't want to pull it so tight that it's doing like a scrunch.
Hey, Katla.
Yep.
Will you either push your loom back away from you
All
or move your camera down? Is that can everyone see that now a little better?
Yeah, it's kind of whited out because of the colors, unfortunately. Let's see. Can I just do? Sorry. Let's see. Bring this here. All right. Oh, let's see if I can use my other loom.
Sure. Bear with us, folks. We're just getting everything set up for you.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just gonna cover that up for a second because this is wrapped around. Not do shaky camera. Okay. There we go. All right. So
if you aren't too far in, because the camera was a little wonky the first time, can you start over, please?
okay.
Thank
So
you.
starting over, the base is this. So the threads that pass underneath that top, underneath the top warping dowel, they will be above the threads where your heddles are just resting naturally. So to weave, for the first pass through, I lift up the threads that are underneath the top warping. I lift up the threads that do not have heddles. I pass through my shuttle. I leave a tail of thread on the other side. And then to come back, you push down the threads that do not have heddles. So heddled threads are on top. You then you put the shuttle in. Do not pull through at first. You tap down lightly. And then you drag the threads through. And you can leave a little bit on the other side because for my next pass, I'm going to lift up the threads that are not heddled. I'm going to tap down lightly. I'm going to leave my shuttle here. I'm going to grab that thread that's attached to the shuttle, and I'm just going to pull it a little bit to tighten up that side. Now, I'm going to pull the thread through. I'm again going to leave a tiny loop on the end. And then it's time for the next pass. So I push down the threads, put in my shuttle, bring the shuttle down, tap. I do 2 taps lightly. And then while the shuttle is still inside the threads, I'm going to take that thread that's attached to the shuttle. I'm going to pull it a little bit so that it is now against. So now there's no space between the warp and the weft on the edges. I'm going to tap down again, and then I'm going to pull the shuttle through. Tapping with the shuttle makes the weave even. You're basically just sort of straightening out the weft. So again, I've pulled the shuttle through. I'm now going to pull that string just a little bit, leave it a little bit loose. And then I'm going to lift up, put in the shuttle, tap down, tug on that string just a tiny bit, tighten it up, and then I'm going to pull the other string through. Are there any questions? Do we need a different angle?
Yes, we do need a different angle. Etane, can you come off mute and explain which angle you are wanting to see?
Can she simply turn it to the side towards the camera
So that you're looking on it straight on?
so we can see the top?
Oh, so we can see the top.
All right, if I had a camera person.
I'm sorry, I'm not there.
We're patient.
Let's see. How is this?
Can you scoot it slightly to the left? I think that's a little better. Does that work for everybody else?
Yes, for me.
Okay. So, I'm just going to move over to the other side because what I suggest people do is it's always best to start and stop on the same side so you know which way you're supposed to weave and where you are in the pattern. With Inkle looms, it's not as important because if you see the string over here, that means you have to move the other way. However, for card weaving, this is all like setting up good patterns for card weaving, should you ever choose to do it. So we start on our right side of the loom, and this is for the right-handed looms, obviously. On the right-handed side, you pull the threads up. So you go in, you pass the thread through, you then pull it so that there's a tiny little bit extra. You take the threads, you push them down, put the shuttle in, you tap down, not too hard. You leave the shuttle in and you pull this string. The way I do it, I have very sensitive fingertips, so I actually leave it closed, and when I pull, I can feel when it is tight enough to stop pulling. So now that I pulled that through, I'm going to do a tap down again, which shifted the camera. I do a tap down and pull the thread through and leave a little bit. Don't tighten it all the way, basically. And then you lift up, put your shuttle in, tap down, take the thread, pull it just slightly. So now everything is flush along the edges. Pull the thread through. And then you also may have noticed when I pull the thread through, I put my pinky in it. That's to prevent it from twisting and getting a knot. Because you're dealing with threads, so knots happen. So now that I'm on the left side, I push down, put the shuttle in, I tap, I leave the shuttle, I pull that thread tight that went through last time, I tap again, pull the shuttle out, pull the thread through, leave a little bit, and then I'm ready to start the cycle over. Any questions? Anything people want to do? People want to see weaving at speed?
Sorry, I stepped away. Hang on.
Yeah, I got it. Weaving at speed is less exciting than warping at speed because, like, warping is where the danger is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are people commenting on?
No, we have no comments except Deb really likes your cactus. No, I would say go at speed.
I just have a quick question. Are we supposed to see the warping?
You do see the warp. You do not see the weft. The weft is going across, and
I do see the weft.
Inkle loom is a warp only on the top. You do not see the weft. The only place you would see it would be on the sides. You can kind of see these little bumps. Camera's not terribly focused on them. I'll weave in a different color in a minute. I'll show you how to swap out threads. But so weaving at speed looks like I'm on the right, I tap, move the thing, tap, move the thing. I usually, when I'm weaving, I'm on the couch and I sort of clamp the loom between my legs so it can't move around the way it can on this table. And that makes me able to weave faster. But this is pretty close to.
So if you are seeing the weft thread, so I actually pulled out some of my old my old bands. If you can see the weft thread in the middle on this side, the threads that are going back and forth, if you can see them in the middle of your band, then your tension when you are making your weft is not tight enough. Try and pull your strings a little tighter as you go back and forth. You will be able to see your string on the edges, like Katla said, if they are a contrasting color to your edge strings. If it's the same color, like this one is, that is a green weft and 2 green edges, so you cannot really see it. However, you will see it, especially if I have to find it. If your tension, going back to the tension, if your tension is very loose at the edges, you will be able to have a very, very bumpy edge. And that is because your weft thread is not pulled tight enough. And that is what you are seeing, is you are just seeing the weft thread making with the warp. Katla, you are muted.
You can choose to do it as a stylistic choice. It's not my scene, so I don't do it. It's not necessarily wrong unless you decide it is wrong.
Yes.
Which is a lot of this. There are multiple ways of doing things. So if you're doing it different from me, that's fine. So next thing is, oh my gosh, I've run out of thread for my weft. Whatever am I going to do? Well, first, I'm pretty close to where my heddles are, so I'm going to do what I call advancing, where I'm again going to grasp on that first diagonal thread, and I'm going to grasp on the top of my weaving area, and I'm going to shift these threads down so that now...
loosen your tension bar first?
Oh yes, I loosened the tension bar. So then I can move it, and now I'm going to tighten my tension bar. And I always test, I do this handshaking thing because that's me testing how much tension there is, because I want a little bit of give, but I don't want to be able to like drop my hand all the way down to the bottom of the loom. And over time, your tension bar with the weaving, because there is pickup from this, because the thread has a height to it, your tension bar will slowly creep back towards you, which is why you always want to start at least halfway out, if not as far back as you can, for the tension.
Can you push your loom slightly away from you? Perfect.
All right, I want to keep the heddles in frame.
There you go.
There we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have this string. Oh my gosh. It's like I'm not gonna be able to finish weaving the rest of this. It's not long enough. So you have a shuttle with, it would be the same color. I'm doing a different color so that it's easier to see. So I'm on this, the string is on the right hand side, so I need to go to the left. So I'm gonna lift up, I'm gonna put my shuttle in with the new color. But for the first pass, I'm gonna put this new color in, but I'm gonna hold this open with my hand, and I'm gonna put the old color, the old weft through, so that both of them are in there. So there's 2 strings going across now. There's your original weft, and there's your new weft.
It looks like we have another question from Arliana and Peter.
I believe you're on mute if you're asking the question now.
Your camera has shifted. We can't see it.
I can't see where you.
It's
Okay.
at the bottom right of the screen, or
Okay,
bottom left.
It was off screen.
It's still off screen.
It's
Yeah,
on
Much better.
Do you have your chat feature open?
No. Now we
Okay.
can see it.
Now we can see it. It was off screen.
There you
Okay.
go.
I'll do it again. So you're on your right-hand side. The thread is almost done. You don't want to wait too long for it. When there's about 6 inches left is a good time to transition. So you're going to put your shuttle through. You're going to pull through your new weft. You're going to put the old weft through as well. So you have a thread sticking out to either side. And there are 2 threads now going across. So the next step you're going to do is you're going to push down because you're going from left to right. You're going to tap down with your shuttle. You're going to pull the threads a little bit to get them flush. You're going to pull through the new weft. You're going to pull through the old weft. And then next step, you're going to lift up. You're going to tap down. You're going to tighten those threads just so. Tap again. And you're going to pull through the new weft. Oh, they're getting tangled. You're pull through the new weft. And one last time, I'm going to pull through the old weft. I like to do 3s because it's a good number. And then you're going to push down because you're going left to right. Going to tap down. Going to tighten the threads. And then you're going to only take your new weft back through. So now you resume normal weaving. You push up, tap down, slide the thread, go left to right, push down, tap the thread, pull through. You're going to weave left to right, and I'm going to weave a bunch so you can see. So now that combining the thread like that, the trim will be totally fine when you take it out. When you're done weaving, you'll want to just trim those. You'll take your scissors and you'll trim like as close as you can to where it is. And then if it were the same color, you wouldn't be able to tell where that change had occurred. Let me just get this on the right. So we end on the right. Now, because I'm using a purple weft thread, you can see these little dots. Those little dots are also there for the blue, but because I used blue as the weft, you do not see where the thread is crossing. So this is the only place you should see the weft. If you're doing standard inkle weaving, the only place you see the weft is on the edges. And you can avoid seeing the weft by having the weft match whatever the border of your inkle trim is. Again, you may choose to stylistically have a different color. I have a black and white and yellow band I wove that I used a weft of white because I ran out of black. And it looks like stars sprinkled across the night sky. So it's very cute. But that wasn't my intent when I started out. However, it looks fine. You know, there's nothing wrong with having the stuff not match. Are there any questions about adding in a new weft? I can demonstrate it again if people would like.
Just can we see the top?
Huh?
Attain would like to see the top again. If there's, I'm not sure there's a way to move the camera one more times to see the top, because we are looking at the top fairly closely now, but it might be worthwhile trying. Or what we can do is take pictures and post later as well, because it seems like the camera is having some trouble getting resituated. Does that work?
I have one more prop I can use, but
why don't we take some pictures and post those pictures later, because I think the camera staying as still as possible might be better. Is that okay for you, Etain?
Fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
okay. So did people want to see that whole process again? I'll just use this. Okay, so combining it, we have our thread on the right. It's near the end of its life. So because it's on the right, you're going to lift up the thread. You're going to pull through the new weft. And you're going to pull through the old weft. Because you're going left to right now, you push down, you tap the threads, pull them tight, pass through the new weft, and this is your second pass of the old weft. You're gonna pull those tight. With the shuttle in, you're gonna pull through with the new weft. You're gonna pass through the old weft. And you're gonna push the threads down. You're gonna tap down. Pull those tight. And then, because this is pass number 4, you are only taking through the new weft. And now you begin weaving as normal. So you push up, tighten the thread, pull the thread through, push down, tap the thread down, tighten the thread, pull the thread through, and so on. And ending on the floor. Oh no, the camera jumped.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. It's the danger of a sort of clamped on camera. Okay. Now how I got the angle I had before. Okay, there we are. So that's weaving. Are there any questions?
I've also just posted in the chat one more time the link to the presentation and paperwork from today. So if you want to peruse at your own leisure later, it's there for you. Yes. Do you have a question, Peter?
Yeah, we got to the full thing, but then we missed the tying off because it went too quickly. And I would love to see how you tie the end to the beginning and where you cut. I saw the shifting, but I didn't see the tying.
1 to 19.
I don't, well, we can do a pretend version of it. I don't really have a way to do the whole thing again.
Describing in words would be great.
Okay.
I have a loom on my side, Katla, if you'd like me to demonstrate over here.
I'm just tying a thread. I can.
Okay.
So, the best way to display it. So when you have it warped,
You'll need to shift your camera.
yep. Long enough. It's not quite long enough.
Peter, if you'd like, what the other thing we can do is we could, I will rewatch this recording and post a timestamp for where the tying off originally was. And that way we don't need to redo it right now because it might be a little difficult to redo on a loop that's already warped.
I
Thank you.
have a fake way to do it.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, sorry, I was just getting it set up. So pretend that is the purple visible? Yes. Okay. So pretend that the purple is thread 1. I feel like further away is actually better for this camera. Pretend that this purple thread is thread 1 and this red thread is your thread 19. With the red thread all the way up, you're going to cut it. Similar to where you've been cutting stuff to tie the knots. Then you're going to hold tension on the red thread and you're going to get the purple thread and you're going to cut that off of the dowel. And then you make sort of an X with that purple and that red. And then you're just gonna tie it like you would with a ribbon on a present. Just whatever knot you can get, and then you want to tighten it as much as you can. So this is as tight as I could get it, and then I'm going to knot it again 2 and 3 times so that it is tied. It's just tying a knot between the two. And you want it to be in the same sort of position as you have your knots that are for connecting the yellow and the blue.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Any other finishing? Any other questions? So I think I saw one about finishing weaving. To finish weaving, this will stay together. You don't need to do anything special. All you do is just cut the warp. And it's done. You will have, so when you're weaving and you get to like the end, I guess I can demonstrate that. I'll advance. So I'm undoing the tension bar and I'm advancing this to where the end of the warp would be. We'll pretend I wove everything. As you advance, keep an eye on these pegs. This one especially likes to slide over. You do not want it to slide off. You can put it back on. It will be fine. You can also use a hair tie to prevent it from moving. Or a rubber band.
Yes, that's what I do.
I live dangerously and leave it. Okay, so here we are. All right, just tighten everything up. Nope. So when you're at the end of a warp, just just leave this a bit to get a better visual. So I'll just be a minute. At a certain point, you will not be able to advance your loom any farther than you have. It will physically be stopped from moving by how the threads are placed. So, let's see, how can I angle this? Okay, so the top of this, there's a woven bit here. You can see how that's part of the ankle trim. Eventually, this portion will reach this heddle and will reach this top heddle. And when this reaches that, that's as far as you can go. You can continue weaving as long as you can move this thread up and down. Once you are no longer able to, I just cut it off somewhere in the middle, and then I'll trim up towards the ends. Some people do fringe on their ankle, on their weaving, if they're planning to use it as a belt or something like that. Most of mine goes on clothes, so I just leave it as is, and then I cut it when I actually use it. What you can do is when you stop weaving, so you can weave until probably up about here. There is then like a foot of waste. You can use that string to make more heddles. They are long enough on this loom to wrap all the way around. Yeah, I'm not going to cut this because I'm going to actually weave it instead of just wasting the crochet cotton, but you just take your scissors here and just snip through. And that's how you finish the weaving.
What I recommend for finishing your weaving, Katla may disagree, but I get anxiety about it. Loosen your tension bar before you snip your threads. Otherwise, they will snap back. And it's kind of scary to happen. It will not hurt your weaving. Your weaving will stay where it's supposed to be. But I would recommend loosening your tension bar.
I forgot about that. Yes, loosen your tension bar. So now you can move the thread
and then snip. Yes.
Yes.
Tracy, yes, you can save the heddles. And in fact, you should be saving the heddles. At one point, I had something like 200. Only 3 of them are in my house still. They are like anything else small and necessary. They like to go walking. So yes, keep your heddles because you can use them for years.
Yeah. So I have these, are all from old projects. I keep mine in a little Ziploc bag, which I have titled Small Loom Heddles because I also have large loom. Luckily, I only have the 2, so I do not need to distinguish further. But yes, keep your heddles, reuse them. Eventually, they can get a a little bit of stuff on them. It's threads from when you pull the crochet cotton through, it's like pilling a little bit. And over time, you will build up on the peak of your heddle. There will be like a tiny little, usually it ends up looking like a little black, like fuzzy thing around it. You can just pick that off and you can keep using the heddle. Or you can just break it open and use the heddle with that little fuzzy bit still on it. It does not hurt the weaving at all. So yeah. Any other questions? We're almost at the end of our time. Okay, so I'm assuming no more questions. So I'm going to stop the recording after I say thank you everyone for attending this class. I hope everyone had a great time, and thank you, Lady Patience, for helping to moderate this session.
Yeah.
All right, and now I'm going to stop recording.